Welcome, everyone. We're continuing our class on the world and thought and spirit of Hasidism. And we are going deep into the Maggid of Mezeritch. We studied first the Baal Shem Tov and spent 4 or 5 or 6 classes on the Baal Shem Tov, and we had a documentary that we watched about him. And the Baal Shem Tov was really a figure who just had innovative ways of looking at Judaism and was a free spirit, right? He walked in the mountains, but the power of his charisma, spiritual charisma, was so intense that people were just drawn to him, and he was able to transform their lives by them meeting him and encountering his religious life and the path that he was beginning to build. And he had the disciples, and he traveled all the way around Eastern Europe and met people, and it was very legendary. But he wasn't so much a builder. He didn't create institutions. It's a different situation, but maybe a similar on some level. There were 2 figures in the 20th century who were maybe modern neo-Hasidic figures that really transformed American and world Jewry, and they were Shlomo Carlebach and Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, who both came from traditional ancient world or Hasidic, and they brought it to mainstream Jewry. And Reb Zalman, the difference between Shlomo, they both had their issues, but Shlomo Carlebach was not a builder of institutions either. He was a Pied Piper type, more like the Baal Shem Tov. He just lived in his world, and
But he was music.
It was music, and it wasn't just music. It was music, right? All the melodies we
Which
sing on
makes
Friday
people
nights.
follow, like
Yeah,
you
exactly.
said.
Make people follow. So, right, there's a famous story of Shlomo Carlebach. I think it's worth sharing because he was very much in the mold of the ancient Sikh leaders, where it was the 405. He was stuck on the 405 highway in LA, which is probably the most backed up highway in the States. And he was supposed to go to lead Shabbat services at a synagogue, but there was so much traffic, he wasn't going to get there. And the time for Shabbat was coming, and a minute before Shabbat, he got out of the car and said, "I'm going to walk there." And the people said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, it's Shabbat, and I observe Shabbat, and I just can't." And he said, "How long will it take me to walk there?" And they said, 5 hours. And he said, "So go back." He said, "Go back, tell the people they'll be there in 5 hours, and prepare them." And so they drove back, and he started walking on the side of the highway. So meanwhile, they went there and drove back, and a few people joined them. And then it started to become a story of this guy who's walking on the side of the highway. And so a radio person came in and interviewed him. And suddenly there were 50, 60 people walking and singing on the side of it. And they got there 1 or 2 in the morning. And they prepared paramedics and all kinds of things to welcome them. People were waiting, but they didn't need it. They had such a great walk. They were so full of life and joy. And they say it was the best Kabbalat Shabbat service ever. At 1, 2 in the morning. So that's some of that spirit, right? But they tried to get him to build institutions, and he started a moshav in Israel, but never really lived there because he was just going around the world traveling and doing concerts and meeting people. And like the Baal Shem Tov, he really cared about people. So when he died, apparently there were 2 services, one I went to in Israel and one in America. And the one in America, a lot of homeless people came to it. And it's because apparently for years he'd been taking care of the homeless, and he was known, after a concert, he just made, let's say, $2,000, and he would give 1,000 to a homeless person, or people would come to him and say, Shlomo, I've never been to Israel. And he'd say, here's $1,000, go to Israel. And he would do things like that, which wasn't good for his family because there was not much left for his family.
He only died 10 years ago. I just looked it up.
Shlomo Carlebach?
No,
it was Reb Zalman.
Zalman.
Zalman died 10 years ago. Yeah, Zalman died 10 years ago. And Shlomo died 20. He died 30 years ago, or
that many.
28. Yeah, he died because he died when I was visiting Israel once. So remember that. But so Shlomo Carlebach, that was the kind of figure he was. But he never built anything. So his music is enduring, but you have institutions. Reb Zalman, he built institutions. He built a renewal movement. He started a renewal movement, so he has a whole movement behind him.
The music lasts longer.
The music lasts a long time, right? And where the music, well, his music has become more and more popular. We do a lot of his music at Shlomo Carlebach. All the Friday nights and the Saturday morning musical Shabbats features a lot of his music. So that was maybe part of the difference between the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov. Was the Maggid was not a builder, the Baal Shem Tov was not a builder of institutions in the same way, but he recognized, perhaps that's why part of why he chose the Maggid to succeed him. But the Maggid was a builder of institutions, and the Maggid didn't travel as much. But he was very much a strong. He was maybe less of a free soul. He was very intellectual, and he was very much about building a whole theology around what the Baal Shem Tov said. And he also was, he was physically ill, so he wasn't able to travel around. So he just stayed in his place, and they came to him. But that story that I've shared a few times of how the Maggid came to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov changed him, and how he was started learning, and he saw the angel, he saw the fire. A lot of the people came to the Maggid had similar experiences, as there were a lot of people who would. Who were very learned in all kinds of Judaism, and they were introduced to the Maggid, and they suddenly had experiences that changed how they lived.
So there's something about if a person gives off that kind of energy or spirituality feeling or something, that's how these people got changed, right?
Exactly. that there's something about living this way of life that the Baal Shem Tov lived, and taking up that path. And being able to, because if you don't have it, I could say, you can know God, but if you yourself haven't known God in that way, how can you teach it? But because the Baal Shem Tov knew God in that intense personal way, he was able to transmit it to the Maggid of Mezeritch. And because the Maggid of Mezeritch knew it, he was able to transmit it to his people, and they could do it to all their disciples. And eventually it gets more and more diluted, right? There's that story that right, the Baal Shem Tov used to go to one spot in the forest, and there he used to build a fire and see God, right? That he had prophetic visions, and then the Maggid too. But then the people came after him. Well, they knew there was a spot that they went to where the Baal Shem Tov used to meet God. They used to light the fire, but they couldn't see God, but they would feel something special. And other people used to go there, but they'd forgotten there was a fire. And then the people that came after, the generation afterwards, they knew there was some place in the forest. They knew which forest, but they didn't know where in the forest. And eventually, one generation later and later, they knew that at some point there was someone who went to some forest, but they'd all forgotten it. So you lose that direct living experience. But in the time of the Maggid, he'd experienced it. So because he experienced it, he was able to give some of it over to his own disciples. And there's all these stories of these very learned people who came to the Maggid and had the same experience. Where they went to him and they thought he would share great Torah, and at first he didn't, but they eventually realized the greatness was not just in the content, it was in the experience of having what you were talking about, that spiritual energy that's, contagious. And when you feel it, you're suddenly, so there's all these stories of the Maggid, so I'll share with you one. This is one of his disciples, Rab Zev said, I'm not sure exactly what he meant about this. Only once in my life did I make a motion of excitement. I guess he wasn't a very excitable person. But he said, one Friday, the great Maggid was sitting in his room near the Beit Midrash, learning the weekly Torah portion by reviewing the scripture twice and the Aramaic translation once. Several students were sitting in the Beit Midrash when suddenly a great light shone upon us. The door opened and our eyes beheld his glowing face. Somehow the Maggid's face started to glow, and we lost our senses. Rabbi Pinchas Horowitz of Frankfurt, his brother Rabbi Shmuel Shmelki of Nikolsburg, Rabbi Elimelech of Lazinsk, and his brother Reb Zusi of Anipol all fled outside. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev had such a spiritual awakening that he rolled under the table, and even I began to clap my hands out of great fervor and excitement. Ever since, I have repented mentally for that movement. Anyway, but it shows you kind of what was happening with these students, right? That there was these moments of great,
Well, they claim pregnant women glow.
Right, they glow, right, exactly. No, you see it. You see people that glow. So you imagine the people glow with that intensity. And that it's spoken across religious traditions. People talk about that, right? So,
and their names are so great, like today, the names are so ridiculous that people have.
sure, right, no, they.
Rabbi, why did he repent of his spiritual manifestation?
I guess he felt he lost control. That's what I think. He was someone who didn't like to lose control, and somehow he lost control, and he felt that he shouldn't have given into it. That was his particular orientation about it. And so it's a good question. The others obviously didn't care as much about. He was someone who didn't like losing control, and I think he lost control, and then made him. It upset him. He wasn't able to control the spirit within him. He lost his sense of it. But I mean, another. I've quoted the story before, but there's a sense of they would say, right, and part of it I want to also bring a sense, because next time we're going to start talking about his individual students, all these great names, right? But whenever we wrote to our teacher, the moment that we were within the limits of the town, all our desires were fulfilled. And if anyone happened to have a wish left, this was satisfied as soon as he entered the house of the Maggid. But if there was one among us whose soul was still churned up with wanting, he was at peace when he looked into the face of the Maggid. So a sense of that they're, we all have a restlessness, right? That's just part of being a human being. And that it wasn't just that he had this spiritual power, but they felt peace around him. And I think that's when you're around a real religious figure, is that you feel peace around them, right? And so that they when they went to them, the restlessness that we all feel in our lives and all the tumult that we all go through, they felt at peace, and that's why they kept going back to him. Because when you find someone who gives you peace, you want to keep going back to them, right? Because we all crave that peace, and that's part of what the Maggid gave to them, and what was so powerful. And he really had a way of teaching that was all about this is what we're going to focus on mainly today. Two things. One was about understanding how, we talked about this last time, how the spiritual world works, and so how you can teach yourself to be more of this, catch the spiritual charisma and peace and make that part of your own life. But he also really taught strongly about how you have to work your own character. And by working your character is how you become a vessel for this kind of peace. It wasn't just, go out there and be full of divine ecstasy, but you have to work on your midot, right? I know the J is into the Musar, right? So it's kind of the Musar, doing the work of working on yourself is how part of what creates the vessel for the spiritual power to come through you. And he really talked about that a lot. So we're gonna be studying some of that. I wanted to share two more stories. One that it was really when the Maggid of Mezeritch that this started to really spread fast, and all these Jews started to hear about it and say, well, what was so great about what you learned about from these Chassidim and the Maggid? And so once someone asked Aaron of Karlin, who was one of the disciples, and we'll get to, and we'll go back to the maps, what did you learn in Mezeritch from your Rebbe, the Maggid? And he said, absolutely nothing, he replied. They said, what do you mean? Cried his questioner. He said, I learned that I am absolutely nothing. And so he was, learned that humility, but also the sense of, and then someone else who, before I came to my master, the Maggid of Mezeritch, said Rabbi Yisrael, the Maggid of Kochnis, I learned 800 books of Kabbalah. But when I met him, I discovered I hadn't begun to learn. And that, there's different kinds of learning, especially when you're learning spiritual matters, when you understand it from the inside, you're not learning it just theoretically, you're actually experiencing it, right? That's what he learned from the Baal Shem Tov. And so there's something about experiencing something when you're learning it, where it's not just information, but it's experiential. So you have to be open to that. It's when you bring that experiential learning, it becomes alive for you. And I think in my own little way, I try, and that's what is really important to me. And when I first met David Schwartz, who's our education director, we both used to work at Camp Ramah. And I was a first-year rabbinical student all those years ago. And he was a counselor of some
At
kind.
the same time? you
Same
did that?
camp, yeah.
Oh,
He
Oh, I
was a
didn't know that.
camper. Yeah, he was a counselor. He was doing some kind of, he was teaching Judaism. And so I was at the camp, and I was a first year rabbinical student, and had to teach Judaism. And they were offering electives to the ninth graders. And they said, I was completely knew nothing about Ramah, was just discovering American Jewry. In fact, I'd come from Israel and didn't know much about American Judaism. And they said, well, you're going to be teaching an elective, but good luck, because you're going to be teaching it against all these rabbis. So the students are going to have to pick between you and these three other rabbis for which elective. So don't take it too harsh if nobody picks your class. And I said, so what are you going to talk about? And I said, well, I'm going to talk about relationship with God. They said, good luck. So, so they said, you're gonna have to sell your class to students. All the ninth graders get together, right? There's hundreds of them, and you have to sell your class, and they pick your class. So I started talking. I said, well, I'm gonna teach about relationship with God, and we're gonna go for walks in nature, and we're gonna meditate every day, and we're gonna talk about all these things. And all the students wanted to take my class. None of them wanted to take the other rabbi's class. So yeah, so all the rabbis got really upset because but every year, next 4 years, I would teach this class, and it became this really big thing. And I think with the student, and eventually I'd have these in every so you can teach meditation at a summer camp. The ninth graders, they don't want meditation, but they loved it, and they were doing half an hour of meditation every day. These ninth graders, and a lot of them put on their form after camp. It was the best thing they did at camp, was that they loved that stuff so much. So it was and the postscript is a few years ago. Well, my dad, who was before COVID, he was teaching meditation retreats in Israel, and he got a request from this 21-year-old who was saying, I want to do meditation with you. I want to take this retreat. He never heard from you. Who are you? And he said, well, I took meditation with your son at summer camp, and I was 11 years old, and he was now in his 24, 25, and
That's
then
so
that
nice.
and he did a meditation retreat.
What a great testimony.
Yeah, it was, so, but again, what I was trying to bring is not teach them, academic learning, but try and teach these kids, what does it feel like to have a relationship with God, and how do you bring that into your life? And that's what and so we walked, we talked really about what prayer is, and I tried to be really completely open and direct about it. It's not teaching you, about, how it says they should do it, but let's just do it, and so I think that was my own little way, was bringing, what this movement is about, which is, teaching from a place of your own feeling and living it. And so this is what the Maggid was trying to do, with the Baal Shem Tov's teaching, was make it alive for people, and he developed this group of people around him. Anybody have any thoughts or questions before we move on to some of our texts? Okay. We're gonna get eventually to stuff that's more like qualities one works on, but I just wanted to bring this first quote, because it's just the basic idea of the Maggid of Mezeritch. It wasn't like he said we shouldn't do all the mitzvot, we shouldn't pray. He said we're just doing Judaism, but we're doing it in a slightly different way. But this way is about bringing God fully and the experience of God into everything we're doing. So let's talk. Let's just someone go ahead, Alan. Read for us the first one.
Okay. Number one, Dove Bear of Mezeritch. When a person does a mitzvah, a spiritual commandment, he should concentrate his speech, action, and thought, because thereby he will lift up the mitzvah and break it out of its physicality and bring it closer to its source and foundation in the higher worlds.
So it's just saying, when you do a mitzvah, whatever it is, you're not just doing the mitzvah for its sake, but if you're able to really focus on when you're doing it, then there's an opportunity there to really lift up your mind and spirits. And so this is the basic view of the Hasidim. I mean, start the Baal Shem Tov. But any mitzvah you do, whether it's giving charity or prayer or putting up a mezuzah, if you focus your whole being into it, right, speech, action, and thought, that mitzvah becomes a vehicle to meet God, right? So there is a sense that we I mean, we've talked about this a lot, but musical Shabbat, the whole purpose of musical Shabbat is so that we see the prayer can be that vehicle to meet God, because the music helps us connect to it. But everything we do can have that power. Don't want to spend too much time on that one. I just want to bring as a foundation of, because Dov Ber talked a lot about the mitzvah. There's a soul and there's a body to every mitzvah, and everything is about every mitzvah you do. And I want to get to this more specific way of looking at some of our qualities. Jay, do you mind reading for us the next one? This is about how do we deal with anger?
The Hasidic master Dov Ber of Mezeritch took a different approach. He compared controlling our lower nature to getting honey from a beehive. How do we get honey from a hive without being stung? By bringing fire and smoke to the hive until the bees are forced to leave. This is how we scatter our anger, by drawing on the love and awe of God.
What do you think of this?
So I actually wrote notes on this when I came
Okay.
in. So
Okay.
to me, it reads like, the first analogy I had was, it reads like, the analogy that I had was, it's like the rabbinical prohibitions on distancing yourself from biblical prohibitions, so you don't transgress. You don't, how it's a layer removed to defense, yeah.
Defense
So,
around.
Exactly, yeah. So you, to avoid being stung, you avoid bees, and to avoid bees, you bring what scares them. And you learn to control them. Love and God scare anger, or the Yetzi Hara, so you bring that in to scare away the anger.
Very nice. I like how you put that. It's a way of now you don't have to take on always full on the anger, but you find a way around it. You put something between yourself and the anger. I mean, anybody can imagine this would be an effective way, or you feel anger to suddenly think about the love or awe of God or love of another person, or
I want to make a comment, Rabbi, if I can.
yeah.
I was actually studying prayer this week on Monday, and we were studying the Mishnah Torah. So Maimonides, Rambam talks about prayer and the obligation of prayer, and he emphasizes starting prayer and how fundamental it is for the connection with God, as you were talking about, Rabbi. And in my notes, I wrote down Deuteronomy 11:13, where it says that you obey the commands by giving that was given you today to love the Lord your God, to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul. And for me, that is the emphasis of prayer, right? Is remembering that love that you have for God, and that can overcome that anger, right? When you pray the Shema, when you do the Amidah, that it's that love, and finding that structure and intent and purpose of your prayer overcomes that anger with love for God.
Beautiful. I love how you brought the second paragraph of the Shema, because it's a practice, right? If you have the practice of bringing up that love, then it's hard to bring up that love from nowhere when suddenly you've got anger. But if you have a practice of bringing up that love in general, then it's easier to bring up that love to counteract the anger. And you create that groove within yourself of turning to that love to overpower the anger.
Now, I want to thank Jay and Octavio, because as I was reading this, I kept coming back to how can we equate the love and awe of God to the fire and smoke. One is a very positive kind of feeling, that the love of God, when using the fire and the smoke, you're sort of provoking the bees. It's more of to my mind at least, it's a lot more negative. And so I was having it at a whole different level, trying to I was having difficulty comparing, but you brought it a whole different, Octavia brought a whole different viewpoint to it that opened my mind a lot.
As soon as you said that, I didn't make that connection. As soon as you said it, like Sodom and Gomorrah, they brought fire and brimstone until the evil left. It's kind of worked out the same endpoint, different ways of getting there.
Yes. And I think in this case, it's actually very pragmatic. I don't think it's the analogy isn't meant to be judged too deeply. It's just saying you suddenly have bees who are coming to sting you.
Yeah.
And anger can feel like that. There's no way to how do you get away from anger, right? When anger is coming to get you, what do? You just feel so angry. It's very hard to resist it, right? The other Dov Ber says somewhere else that when anger overcomes you, you lose touch with your own soul, right? Because you can feel that, right? And sometimes angry, even though you don't say that to this person, you still do it anyway, right? You just can't stop yourself, right? Because you're just overcome with anger. And so the Hasidim actually spent a long time, because for the Hasidim, it's so important to be able to control the lower parts of you that you don't have. They're not saying it's not good to feel angry. We all feel anger, right? But to let it overtake you and make you say and do things you shouldn't say and ruin relationships and yourself, that does it, right? And you don't want to be cut off from your soul. So they spend a lot of time on how do you work with with what they call your lower nature. So they're just saying, when bees are out to get you, you can't fight a bee. How are you going to fight a bee? Try fighting your bee. You're not going to have too much luck. So they say, what do? You bring smoke, and that's how you get the honey from the beehive, right? So,
You
it's very
told us
practical.
once about having God in your heart.
Yes,
So if I start to get mad, I go like this,
yes, wow.
because then it's reminds me, cool down, lady.
That's an amazing use of the exact same thing. That's an amazing. So what actually a story I didn't think of bringing, but there's a great story. Bring it so I get the exact wording. But I really loved it. Here we go. So right, we talk about Chassidim and the Mitnagdim, right? The Mitnagdim are the people who are against the Chassidim. So there's a story that once one of the Mitnagdim was complaining to one of the Chassidim, one of the students of the Maggid Rev Zev of Zitomir, about his son-in-law who was following up the Maggid. And he says, I am a well-respected scholar and a wealthy man, yet I feel no pride. But my son-in-law, who doesn't reach my ankles, you've dragged off to Mezeritch, where he battles pride day and night. And so Rev Zev explained, that's why he went to the Maggid. So what do you do with the Maggid, said the fuming Misnagid? What greatness is there without Torah or good deeds? I was in Vilna and heard true Torah from the Gaon himself. Reb Zev answered with a smile. In the Maggid's made midrash, one realizes that one can live 70 years filled with pride while believing in perfect faith that one has never tasted pride in one's life. And so it's easy to say, well, I don't have any pride, but the Hasidim were all about everybody. But we said, how did the Baal Shem Tov pick the Maggid? Because he said, you can never. It's always, how do you get rid of pride? It's always there, or we're always working with our lower nature. And so there's a great sense of getting into a battle with your pride. And it's very easy to just push it away or pretend it's not there, or hide it in a little corner, or say, oh, I don't have pride, but really there's pride. So the Hasidim were very open about, we all have those things that we need to work on. And pride doesn't mean we shouldn't be proud of things that we're good at, but it's about the things that were the little parts of ourselves, that the ego that gets in. Go ahead.
I can't remember where I read it. It might have been Harold Kushner, but I can't remember where I read it.
Yeah.
It was a couple years ago, but isn't it with like pride, if you suppress pride and things you're proud of, that it can actually, suppressing pride too much can become a negative trait, because if you have done something that other people should look at and want to look at you for guidance to, and you're saying, I'm not proud of that, it's kind of like a negative trait at that point, because you're diminishing actual accomplishments that God's blessed you with.
Well, I think what the Hasidic view of real pride is, first of all, if you're saying, I'm not proud of this thing, it probably means you're actually really secretly very proud of it, but you
Yes.
don't want to demonstrate to everybody
Right.
how proud. Because if it's just something very natural, you're not proud of it, like, oh, this is just a skill I have, then you're very happy to teach it to people. You just have it, right?
Yeah.
But and so what they felt, the Hasidim, is that in the traditional Talmudic world, there was a lot of false piety, when people were saying, oh, I'm not proud at all, but really deep, inside, they were so proud of their learning and of their study and of their this and their that, and saying, really examine in your heart, like, are you proud of it or not? Because if you're, so the second you start thinking about it, saying, oh, I don't want to go talk to everybody about this thing that I'm doing because I don't want to everybody think I'm proud. That probably means you're being proud, right? It's just be natural about it. Be natural about your life and about everything. And and if you think if you're thinking, well, I don't want everybody to know that I'm good at this, that probably means you think you're good at it, So, but if you didn't think you were so good at it, you would just be sharing it naturally with everyone. So I think that there's a sense of, looking with a real eye at everything, at yourself, and how you go about, and just trying to be natural about it, and in the relationship. And they hated the false piety that can sometimes be in a very religious world too. Like I shared the story before, right, of a close family friend of ours whose I think father or uncle was a famous ultra-Orthodox rabbi, who wore 50 pairs of tzitzit every day, 50 pairs of tzitzit. And so it was known throughout the Jewish world. So pious, had 50 pairs of, she said, well, his wife is the one who should have been getting all the accolades because she was the one who was washing the 50 pairs of tzitzit, yeah. So there's a sense of when you went, the part of the Hasidim, that they were hand in hand working in understanding spirituality, but also working on themselves in a really intense way, and with all of their thoughts. So let's go to the next text. Someone who want to read number 3?
Asher Tzvi of Ostraha, Mayan HaChochma, as paraphrased in Seeking the Divine Presence. The Hasidic master Dov Ber of Mezeritch teaches that if we want to discover the purpose of our life, then we should look for the attribute that is our greatest weakness. Fixing this attribute lies at the center of our spiritual evolution. Reb Dov Ber also states that we can find the strength that we need to transform these negative qualities by developing the divine attributes that are their direct opposite. The positive power of these divine virtues will eradicate all of our negative qualities. When we have the fear of God, we will be afraid of nothing in this world, for we will rely wholly on God and his protection. When we have the love of God, our heart will expand and love all living creatures because we will see them as part of one single eternal reality.
So this is from my dad's book, Seeking the Divine Presence. But
Like that.
so Dov, we often think that the greatest purpose of our life is to take our greatest quality and show it to the whole world, right? That's what comes naturally, and to take our greatest fault and to hide it as far into ourselves as we can, right? That's what we think. But the Hasidic way, as you do, is the opposite, right? We already have our qualities. We don't need to work on it. They're already our qualities. The job in our life is to take what's our greatest weakness and to just take it full on, but to develop the opposite quality. And so we talked about this with the Baal Shem Tov, but right, what's his name? Moses, right? Moses.
What's his name? I think we know that guy.
That guy Moses, once was part of our tradition, right? So he was scared of going to do God's mission. In the end, what did he have to do? He had to live. He went, right? He didn't want to speak for God. In the end, he gives the greatest talk of his life in the book of Deuteronomy. I'm slow of speech. I don't want to deliver God's words. In the end, he gives a whole long speeches of his life. So it's kind of, you're here in this world and then they say that Moses opened the path of fearlessness, because he worked his whole life to conquer fearless. So we all have those things in our life that we work we face in ourselves.
Can I give you an example of that?
Go ahead, yeah.
Okay, when I first went in practice, it was about 40 years ago. My son said to me, Mom, you know what your problem is? I said, well, what's my problem? He said, you always have to have the last word. You always have to be right. I said, what are you talking about? He said, see what I mean? You just did it. So it's something I'm still working on.
Well, it's really interesting because it's often those things that other people see in us, we can't see
That's
ourselves,
right.
right? Because it's so part of us, we
Yeah.
can't see it. But it's seeing that part of ourselves. But I love this. It's like, how do you develop the opposite? Yeah, you have to develop the opposite part of it, right? So it doesn't mean you only have to work at it, but if you develop the opposite quality, then you slowly whittle away the other, which is really, really powerful.
Not
And
easy.
so if you know, if you're, I remember reading this thing about a spiritual teacher, that, or to go see him, you had to get on a boat. And when people would just cross the river, and there was the boat, and then everybody went on this boat, wasn't always to go see him, was to go see other people who live on the other shore. But everybody knew that this great teacher lived on the other shore. And so once his students were on the boat, and there was a student on the boat who was, a very totally easygoing and a little bit meek student, and he heard someone on the boat saying bad words about the teacher, and he's like, okay, whatever, my teacher is beyond all of these words. What is he going to care? So he didn't say anything. And when he got to the other shore, he told the teacher. The teacher said, what? Someone was insulting your teacher and you didn't say anything? You didn't stand up for it? And he was like, you needed to stand up and say something. And but another time, same things on the boat, but this time the student on the boat was someone who was a hothead, and someone on the boat was saying something bad about the teacher, and he suddenly stood up and said, if you say that again, I'm going to sink this whole boat, and started rocking the boat back and forth. And then he told the teacher, and the teacher said, what? You would threaten the lives of all these innocent people to defend me? So it's kind of like depending on, we each have different things that different approaches to the same thing. It's all about what's in our mind and in our nature and the parts of us that need to be worked on, right? So it's, we all have our things that the places. And so Dov Ber was really, that's how he trained his disciples, as he would help them see in themselves what it was that they needed to look at, point it out, and say, and help them. This is how you get to it, in your path. And so there's a whole, in Chabad they have lots of stories about the first Chabad Rebbe. The founder of Chabad was a student of the Maggid of Mezeritch, and there's all these students about how when he used to go see the Maggid was always trying to help him work on, on these quality, on his faults, and sometimes only see him once a year, but then once a year you'd get enough oomph to work for the rest of the year and come back and see how much, Rabbi Nachman of Breslov used to say, if you're able to conquer one thing in your life, you've gone a long way, right? So it's not easy to do all this work, but it's powerful stuff.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Go for it. Yeah, Howard, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what we are to understand by the fear of God.
Yes. And so this is how I would see it. So maybe in a very practical way, let's say one is a person who is experiences fear a lot, has anxiety about different things in this world, and that's what's stopping you from living the life of service to God that you should be living. So maybe you should say, instead of saying, well, I'm fearful of what this person will think or hear or what will happen to me, you say, how could I be afraid of that? I need to be afraid of what God will think of me, that I'm not fulfilling my very purpose in this world. And so by developing that practice of being, saying, well, I shouldn't be fearful of what people are thinking, because what do they know about it? They're all got their own journey. What I really should be fearing is the day when I have to face my Creator and say, I didn't live my purpose because I was afraid of what Cohen was gonna say and what Shmuel was gonna say, and I didn't live my purpose, and that's, so right, Reb Zusia, there's a story about Reb Zusia, who was one of the students of the Maggid of Mezeritch. On his deathbed, he was very fearful, and the student said, "What, you're fearful of facing God? What are we?" And he said, "Well, I'm not. What I'm afraid about is that when I face my Creator, he's going to say to me, he's not going to say to me, why weren't you more like Moses? He's going to say, why weren't you more like Zusia?" And so every one of us, it's all about how can we. It's all about being more our own selves, and he was worried. Even him, a great master, was worried that at his deathbed, God was going to say, "You tried too much to be like Moses instead of being like yourself." So it's all, I think in this case, it's about the opposite. Instead of being fearful of what people will think, what the world will think of you, or have fear of God, and that fear of God, we were here in this world for the short period of time. We should maximize our time here by living our life as we wish to, and not being worried about this so and so and so and so. Because in the end, what does it matter? So that would be one way of countering, for example, that type of fear. And once you get there, that will give you, fearlessness for everything else. And if one is a person who has trouble, loving other people, we just tend to not feel love. We're just not, it doesn't come naturally to us to have an open heart. And, if you start to try to open your heart all the time, and now, expand to loving all other people. And so we all have different things that we're working on. For some people, it comes very naturally to just be who they are and not to worry about what other people think. For other people, it comes very naturally to just love all other people. And for other, we all have different things. And another Hasidic teacher says, what's a mountain for one person is just a molehill for the other, right? It's like a nothing. And so it's easy to say. And so we all have our different things that we work on. And Hasidim very much believe that was part of our purpose here in the world. Let's go to the next one. I really want to get to the last one, especially. But let's read the number 4. When we read for us number 4.
Maggid of Mezeritch, Uti, Utai, Amrim. All of the creating in the universe is done through the Spirit of Wisdom, as is written in Psalm 104:24. You have made them all with wisdom, and it is wisdom that brings into being all things, all change and transformation in the universe is only made possible through the power of wisdom. That is, nonetheless,
Nothingness. There is nothingness.
Nothingness, pure consciousness. And this is the reason why the Spirit of Wisdom, Chachma, is called Koachma.
The power of what? This is literally what Koachma means. Yeah.
That is the power of nothingness, which is the primal state of each world where all forms and garments are stripped away. And the major joy and delight that God experiences, so to speak, comes from the contraction of his being to dwell in a manifest universe. As written in Proverbs 3:19, the Lord with wisdom founded the earth.
So there's this is bringing in Kabbalah with something that the Hasidim really created, was starting with the Maggid, which is the idea of nothingness. The nothingness is a true state of worlds before creation, and this kind of, and the nothingness isn't only what existed before the creation of the universe, but you can still access that in consciousness by going back from materiality into spiritual. It's called bitul, which means annihilation. It's kind of like you take away your consciousness until you get to that power. But part of what he's saying here is that the power to make this transformation that we're talking about, both in the physical world and in our own self, right? How do you transform a quality that's so deeply ingrained in your own self? By accessing that power that's latent in the universe of nothingness, or that the power of the universe itself. And by accessing that in prayer and meditation, you're able to truly have the power to stop. Because it's easy to say that, but we all know there's a lot of therapists here, right? The groove, how do you go past your grooves? You know, we have grooves in our minds and our behavior. So how do you change that? So hard, right? So the only way to change your groove is by accessing that power, which is wisdom. And to them, wisdom isn't just a clever way of thinking. Wisdom is that power that is coming to that place where you really are going beyond the mind and thinking about yourself with that detachment, which is beyond everything. And so that's what God wants from us, right? The major joy and delight that God experiences from his contraction of his being. So God, when God contracts, removes himself into that nothingness, we can follow that same path and experience God in that nothingness. And that's what brings joy to God, because we experience that endless nothingness, and it gives us the power to make change in ourselves and the world. So a lot of what the Hasidim talk about is how do you access that nothingness, because that nothingness is what fuels your journey of musar, your journey of self-help, of self-change, of self-transformation. And that so when you access all these ecstatic states that we've been talking about, it's not only so you feel this wonderful joy, but it then powers you to be able to make those changes, gives you what you need. And so even in a small way, when you go to Kabbalah, when you go to musical Shabbat and you feel joy, or when you meditate, it's not just that you feel joyful in your life, but that should fuel you in your own desire to transform yourself. But I think it's true too, even from a point of view, when you experience spiritual experiences, you often come out with a lot of perspective in yourself. You suddenly have perspective. You're like, well, you know what? I just realized for the last week I haven't really been myself, or I haven't been, looking at this thing in its true way. Maybe I need to change this little thing within myself, even in a very practical way. But it's, all the spirituality is about fueling change, both in oneself, but also in the world. And so now, with that in mind, we could spend a lot of time on this, and we'll have other things about this. The koach of ma, the power of ma means what, and so there's a whole Kabbalistic thing I'm not going to get into, but we'll talk. We can talk about that. We'll talk about more about this, because this becomes a big part of Hasidic theology that the Maggid brought. I want to get to this analogy of top of four, but I think really brings together everything we've been talking about. So someone read number 5.
Suppose that there is a spring that flows high in the hills and far away from a person's fields. In order to bring the water down from the spring to irrigate his fields, the person must first prepare a wide pipe for the water to flow through. And obviously, he must make sure that there are no cracks or holes in the pipe or anything else that might block the flow of water. Because if he gets lazy and does not keep his eye on the pipe to make certain that it is in good condition, then all his efforts will be for nothing, because the water will leak out and never reach his fields at all. Once he has prepared the pipe, then the person must very carefully place the pipe right next to the spring, so that it becomes joined to the spring with a tight and thorough bond. He must make certain that there is no separation between the pipe and the spring, not even a hair's breadth, because if he doesn't, then all his work and efforts will be for naught.
So what's the pipe, and what are the fields? Anybody?
You could just read it like that and not
Just
get
like that.
anything out of it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly, right? It could just be the analogy of it.
It's about yourself or the person, or, to make sure you take good care of yourself, to make sure that
Yeah,
everything's working right,
yeah. Your spiritual pipes are in good
good shape.
Connection between the, shall I say, the universal powers or God and yourself, and how you maintain that by your not only physically but spiritually in your actions. How close are you able to approximate and become closer to God? And you have to have that connection, the important thing. If it separates and you separate from God and that spirituality, then you're not nourished by it.
So what are the fields? What are the fields that the water is nourishing?
My spirit.
Yeah, your life, your livelihood, your spirit. Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds what I do every day, or much of my professional activity, but in a spiritual way rather than physically.
So what are the leaks? What makes a leak in the pipe?
Lots of things, not maintaining it, I think is the big one that is highlighted here. If you don't maintain the path that you laid out or that you're trying to improve or that you have laid, it'll rust, decay, get holes, and you won't see them until it's too late.
Nice. You don't
Might
take
not
care.
even-
But what in our lives are the things that we wouldn't take care of that would create those energies or the divine blessings to not flow into our being, but to flow out of us?
It's
What are the things in our lives that create that lack of care? Or the
life,
life?
busy.
Mm, yeah,
For me,
Yeah.
and there are many things,
Yeah.
but I would say a primary thing is not prayer. Because when I was younger, I used to think I needed to pray because it was, a command and, that sort of thing, but I realized
yeah,
that prayer was something I needed. Not that God needed it for me,
Yeah.
but I needed it
Yeah.
to be in touch with Him.
yeah. Beautiful. And I think that that's the desire to connect that pipeline and to make sure that it's there. I mean, one way of looking at the pipe is when we do get, when we're not working on our midot, on our qualities, if we suddenly get really angry, we're using up all of the divine energy. It's going through the hole, right? It's using up the energy instead of using for something perspective, but something good. We're using it to nourish our anger, and we're using it to take us in this direction that we shouldn't have gone in. And so it's where the more we work on our qualities, the more we're creating a pipe that's taking it into where we want the water to go. It's the character work that we're talking about. So he wanted his followers to have good pipes to bring. And so maybe it's also the study work helps connect the pipe to the right place because you're thinking, your understanding is right. When your understanding is right, it connects your pipe to the right source. Then the prayer is what's pulling all the water into the pipe, and the meditation is pulling the water into the pipe. And then let's make sure you're growing, spiritual and I think physical plants too, that both nourish you and then nourish other people. And the purpose of all of it is not just to, go floating in the ether, but it's to bring it into the world, into the physical fields, right? And so the purpose of all of it is to help people in their moments of sadness and to, inspire people to do acts of tzedakah and to charity and to transform the very fabric of our world. But we have to make sure our pipes are good. We have to make sure we keep connecting to it. And so in some ways, this pipeline, this analogy is all the work that the Maggid was trying to bring and to create was how to do this, right? And to help the Chassidim, maybe in a very esoteric way, he received from the Baal Shem Tov an understanding that you could connect the pipe to a very high place. Because if you can only experiencing it by meeting someone else who's connected the pipe that high or by having a real blessing. So he was then able to help them connect that pipe, but they had to keep it by their study and by their devotion. And they had to keep their own pipes. Nobody else can work on your pipe, right? We can only each work on our own pipes. Nobody can help you work on your anger, right? That's not, you can have someone to talk to, right? But you can't, we all have to do that work ourselves. And so that's.
There's an interesting part of the metaphor where there are two different kinds of issues that affect the flow of the water. One is cracks or holes, which seems to open the pipe to the external environment. And then there's anything else that might block, which might be something coming from the internal environment.
Interesting.
Hole allows things from the external environment, possibly that could be detrimental to your health, your
Interesting.
spiritual health. You can get contamination into your water, and then you're sick. To what extent?
I love that too.
Yeah.
And maybe we could even add to the analogy that, you can the more you try and do this, the bigger your pipes can get, and then you can bring more and more water down into, so it works on so many different levels, right? The more we study this and think about this, and practice, the bigger your pipes are to nourish the fields. All right.
One thing that Dov Bear really stressed was a certain meditation called surrounding and filling. And surrounding and filling was really one of the centers of a meditation that he asked people to do. So that you have the notion that God was around you and God filled you. And that particular meditation, taken concretely, can lead to the experience of the pipes. The filling comes through the pipes, and the surrounding, it's like you think of yourself as, you can think of yourself like a torus ring, which is a very common way to think of this meditation. So you're like a torus ring, and around the ring is the divinity, and the divinity also sort of loops into the ring. The ring is like the pipe, so to speak. So my notion of this, what we're talking about, it's not abstract. It's a very concrete, physical feeling of internal touch that you have that you probably don't notice. And if you access this and accent it for yourself, accentuate it for yourself, it becomes a very intense spiritual feeling for you.
So
And I think that's what he's talking about the pipes.
Thanks for bringing that. I think for next time, and I don't usually bring a practice, but we could start bringing practices. If people are interested, try and take a few minutes and imagine yourself surrounded by all the pipes to bring and the shift between you and other people in your lives and the world around you, and think about how to work on them and being. I love that, David, being surrounded and filled with God. And if you do a few minutes a day, see how it can change you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
and
David.
we'll do more.
Thank you, David. Thank you,
Next
Rabbi.
week.
Thank you.